A 16-year-old girl, deaf since birth, an artist whose hands spoke a language of beauty and grace, lay dying on the pavement. She was shot by the very people sworn to protect her, her final, frantic hand signs for "I can't hear you," mistaken for a threat. The officers saw a black girl with something in her hand and made a fatal judgment. What they didn't know, as they began constructing their wall of lies, was that her grieving father held the digital keys to their entire kingdom. Within hours, he wouldn't just demand justice. He would become the ghost in their machine, dismantling their precinct from the inside out and unleashing a karma so severe it would burn their world to the ground. This is the story of how a father's love became a weapon of absolute reckoning. The late afternoon sun, what photographers called the golden hour, spilled across the quiet streets of Maplewood. It was a light that Naomi Washington loved, a warm, syrupy glow that made the world look like one of her paintings. At 16, her world was a canvas of vibrant color and silent motion. Deaf since a bout of meningitis at age 3, sound was a foreign concept to her, a language she'd never learned. Her language was in her hands, the swift, articulate dance of American Sign Language, ASL, and in the charcoal sticks and paintbrushes she wielded with a surgeon's precision. She was walking home from her advanced placement art class, a large black portfolio case tucked under one arm. Inside was her latest project, a series of portraits capturing the unshielded emotions of strangers on the bus. Her father, David, had called them windows to the soul. Naomi smiled at the thought of him. He was her rock, her interpreter, her fiercest advocate. David, a man whose mind moved at the speed of light through complex code, had learned ASL fluently in 6 months after her diagnosis. He never saw her deafness as a disability, only as a different way of experiencing the world. Her father was waiting for her. Tonight was pizza and movie night, a sacred Friday ritual. He'd already texted her, a string of emojis that translated to, "Pizza oven is hot. Hurry home, my little artist. I love you." She'd replied with a photo of a squirrel she'd seen on the path, and the sign for "Love you too." As she turned onto her street, Hemlock Drive, she felt the familiar vibration of her phone in her pocket. It was probably him again, being impatient. She smiled, pulling it out. That's when she saw the police cruiser rolling slowly down the opposite side of the street. It was an uncommon sight in their quiet corner of the city. The car slowed even more as it drew parallel to her. She felt a prickle of unease. She'd had the talk with her father 100 times. Not the one about birds and bees, but the one black parents have with their children. Keep your hands visible. Be polite. Don't make sudden moves. Announce what you're doing. She gave a small, polite nod to the car, a gesture of deference, and continued walking. But the car crossed the center line, its tires crunching on the asphalt as it pulled up to the curb a few feet ahead of her, blocking her path. 2 officers got out. The older one, thick-set with a weathered face and a graying mustache, was Officer Frank Miller. He'd been on the force for 25 years, and the world had worn him down to a nub of bitter cynicism. His partner, younger, leaner, and with a nervous energy about him, was Officer Kevin Riley. This was only his 8th month on the job. "Hey, you! Hold it right there!" Miller barked. Naomi didn't hear him. She saw his mouth move, his expression hard and accusatory. She saw his hand gesture for her to stop. She complied immediately, freezing in place. The rules from her father's talk flashed in her mind. "Don't run. Don't argue. Let me see some ID," Miller commanded, his voice loud and impatient. Naomi watched his lips, trying to parse the words. ID. She understood that. She shifted her portfolio case to her other hand to reach for her wallet in her back pocket. "Whoa, whoa! Hands where I can see 'em!" Miller shouted, his hand instinctively going to the butt of his holstered pistol. Panic flared in Naomi's chest. She had to tell them she couldn't hear. This was the most important rule. Inform them immediately you are deaf. She raised her hands, palms open, the universal sign of peace. She left her phone and wallet in her pockets. She needed her hands to speak. She started to sign, her movements quick and precise. "I am deaf. I can't hear you." Officer Riley took a half step back. "Frank, what's she doing? Is that some kind of gang sign?" Miller's eyes narrowed. He saw a defiant black teenager, making strange, aggressive gestures with her hands. He didn't see a language. He saw a threat. The black portfolio case under her arm could be anything. A weapon, a shield. "Drop what you're holding, now!" Miller screamed, drawing his Glock 19. The click of the safety being disengaged was lost to Naomi. All she saw was the gun. Pure animal terror seized her. Her hands flew up in a desperate flurry, signing faster, more erratically. "Please, don't shoot. I am deaf." She was trying to be clear, but fear was making her sloppy. To Miller, it looked like she was reaching for something, her hands moving in a blur of hostility. The portfolio case slipped from under her arm and clattered to the ground. The metallic latch made a sharp sound against the concrete. "Gun!" Miller yelled, a word born of prejudice and paranoia, not of fact. It was all the justification he needed. He fired once, then twice. The first bullet tore through Naomi's shoulder, spinning her around. The second struck her in the chest. She collapsed onto the manicured lawn of her own front yard, her eyes wide with a silent, profound shock. Her hands, which had been her voice her entire life, fell limp at her sides. The last thing she saw was the golden light of the sun filtering through the leaves of the old oak tree her father had planted when she was born. Then nothing. Inside, just 50 feet away, David Washington glanced at the clock. 5:17 p.m. He pulled the supreme pizza from the oven, the smell of melted cheese and pepperoni filling the warm kitchen. Naomi was late. He pulled out his phone to text her again, a playful chiding this time. But before he could type a single word, the muffled pop-pop from outside reached his ears. It was a sound he knew from action movies, but hearing it in reality, on his own street, was jarring. It was followed by shouting. A cold dread, immediate and absolute, washed over him. He dropped the phone and ran for the front door, yanking it open. The scene that greeted him would be burned into his memory forever. The police cruiser, lights now flashing, painting the street in hideous strokes of red and blue. The two officers, guns drawn, and his daughter, his Naomi, his entire world, lying crumpled and still on the grass, a crimson stain spreading across her favorite yellow hoodie. "Naomi!" he screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. He sprinted toward her, but Officer Riley intercepted him, shoving him back. "Sir, stay back. You need to stay back." "That's my daughter. What did you do?" David roared, his eyes locking with Officer Miller's. He saw no remorse in them, no panic. He saw only a cold, chilling indifference. Miller holstered his weapon. The suspect was non-compliant and reached for a weapon. We had to neutralize the threat. Suspect, non-compliant, weapon, neutralize. The clinical, detached words were like bullets themselves, each one piercing David's heart. He looked at the portfolio case lying on the ground, its contents spilled out. Charcoal sketches of laughing children and tired old men. That was the weapon. He looked back at Naomi's still form, at the paramedics now frantically working on her, and he knew. He knew she was gone. A void opened up inside him, so vast and cold it threatened to swallow him whole. But in the depths of that void, something else ignited. Not just grief, not just rage. It was a cold, calculating fire. David Washington was not a physical man. He was 5'10", with the soft build of a man who spent 12 hours a day in a chair. His battlefield wasn't the street. It was the invisible world of data, of fiber optic cables and encrypted servers. For 15 years, he had been a top-tier cybersecurity consultant, a digital mercenary hired by governments and Fortune 500 companies to test their defenses. They called him the Ghost because he could slip through any firewall, dismantle any network, and vanish without a trace. He was a phantom who lived behind a keyboard. As he stood there watching the life he had built crumble into dust, Officer Miller spoke into his radio, his voice calm and steady, reporting the incident. He was already building the narrative, brick by brick, the official story, and in that moment David Washington made a silent vow. They had taken his daughter's voice and then her life. They thought they controlled the story. They had no idea that he could control their entire world with a few keystrokes. They had just killed the daughter of the one man on Earth who could make an entire police precinct and everyone in it simply disappear. The father would not just shut them down, he would erase them. The hours that followed were a surreal nightmare. The world warped into a kaleidoscope of flashing lights, yellow tape, and the murmur of hushed official voices. David was forced to sit on the curb of his own street, watching strangers in uniforms methodically document the end of his world. They wouldn't let him near Naomi. He watched them place her into an ambulance, her body shrouded, and drive away without a siren. The silence was more deafening than any scream. He was taken to the Oak Creek Police Precinct, a squat, brutalist brick building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He wasn't under arrest. They called it standard procedure. He was a witness, a victim's father, but the air was thick with something else. He was a potential problem, a loose end to be managed. He was put in a small, windowless room, an interrogation room painted a nauseating shade of beige. Detective Sergeant Bill Morrison, a man whose gut strained against the buttons of his cheap suit, sat across from him. Morrison offered condolences that sounded rehearsed and insincere. "Mr. Washington, we are deeply sorry for your loss," he began, his tone flat. "We need to ask you a few questions about your daughter. Was she involved in any illicit activities? Gangs? Drugs?" David stared at him, the question so absurd, so offensive, that for a moment he couldn't speak. "My daughter was an artist," he finally said, his voice dangerously low. "She was an honor student. She spent her weekends volunteering at the animal shelter. The only gang she was in was the school's chess club. Did she have a history of disobeying authority? Acting erratically?" Morrison pressed, ticking boxes on a mental checklist. "My daughter was deaf, Detective," David said, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. "She couldn't hear them. Did they tell you that?" Morrison's expression didn't change. He scribbled a note. "The officers reported that she was making aggressive hand gestures and refused to comply with verbal commands. The lie was so blatant, so perfectly constructed, it was almost impressive. This was the story. This was the wall they were building. The blue wall of silence, right here in this soulless room. She was using American Sign Language," David said, his voice rising. "She was telling them she was deaf. She was begging for her life. We only have the officer's account at this time," Morrison said smoothly. "Of course, their body cameras will clarify everything. The footage will be reviewed by Internal Affairs as a part of the investigation." David knew what that meant. Reviewed, processed, edited, sanitized. By the time the public ever saw a frame of that footage, it would tell the exact story the department wanted it to. Meanwhile, in another part of the precinct, Chief of Police Robert Davies was in damage control mode. Davies was a political animal, a man who had climbed the ladder by bearing scandals, not solving them. He stood with Officer Frank Miller in his office. Officer Riley was outside, pacing and looking pale. "Talk to me, Frank." "Off the record," Davies said, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass. "It was by the book, Chief," Miller said, his voice a gravelly monotone. "We got a call about a suspicious individual casing houses on Hemlock. Match the description. Black teen, hoodie, carrying a large flat case. We engaged. The perp was non-compliant, refused verbal commands, started making what looked like gang signs. Reached for a weapon. I neutralized the threat. It was a perfect recitation, a work of fiction polished by years of practice. Every word was a shield. Suspicious individual, non-compliant, perp, weapon, neutralized. He never once said girl, child, or Naomi." "The weapon?" Davies asked, swirling the amber liquid. "Turned out to be an art portfolio," Miller grunted. "A tragic mistake, but a justified one based on the perceived threat." "And the body cams?" "They'll back it up," Miller said with utter confidence. "Riley's might be a little shaky, the kid's green, but mine will be solid." Davies took a long swallow of his drink. "The father, David Washington. What do we know about him?" "Some kind of computer geek, works from home, no record, just another grieving parent who's going to make a lot of noise." "All right," Davies said, his decision made. "Miller, you and Riley are on paid administrative leave. Standard procedure. Let IA handle it. The union rep is on his way. The official statement will be brief. Officers were involved in a shooting following an encounter with an armed and non-compliant suspect. The suspect is deceased. An investigation is ongoing. We control the narrative from the very beginning. Got it? Loud and clear, Chief, Miller said. When David was finally released hours later, the sun was long gone. He walked out of the precinct into the cold night air, a hollowed-out shell of the man he was that morning. The world felt wrong, tilted on its axis. He got into his car and drove, not home. He could never go back there, but to a small, nondescript office building he leased in an industrial park on the edge of the city. This was his real office, his sanctuary. The outside was anonymous, but inside was a digital fortress. The main room was Spartan, dominated by a wraparound console with 6 monitors, powered by a custom-built server rack that hummed softly in a temperature-controlled closet. This was the cockpit from which the ghost operated. He sank into his chair, the ergonomic leather sighing under his weight. For a long moment, he just stared at the blank screens. His mind was a maelstrom of grief. Images of Naomi flashed before his eyes. Naomi as a baby, sleeping on his chest. Naomi on her first day of school, her backpack almost as big as she was. Naomi at her last art show, beaming with pride next to her prize-winning painting. The memories were a physical pain, a crushing weight on his soul. He choked back a sob, his body trembling. They had killed his light, and now they were trying to snuff out her memory, to paint his beautiful, gentle daughter as a monster, a perp. They thought their wall was impenetrable. They thought their system would protect them. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The grief was still there, a black hole in his chest, but now it was mixing with that cold, clear fire, the fire of purpose. His hands, shaking just moments before, became steady. They moved to the keyboard, his fingers finding their familiar home. His knuckles cracked in the silent room. First, he needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark. He typed a few queries, his fingers flying across the keys. His search bypassed Google, diving deep into legal databases, court records, and forms. He found her in 20 minutes. Jessica Ramsey, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on impossible cases against corrupt police departments and winning. She was brilliant, relentless, and feared by city attorneys across the state. He sent her a single encrypted email with the subject line, "Urgent, the murder of Naomi Washington." Next, he needed information. He needed to know everything about the Oak Creek Police Department, Chief Robert Davies, Officer Frank Miller, and Officer Kevin Riley. He opened a terminal window. A black screen with a single green cursor appeared. It was his canvas. And tonight, he would begin to paint his masterpiece of revenge. His first command was simple, elegant. He targeted the precinct's external network, their public-facing servers, their website, their email system. He wasn't looking for a brute force entry. That was for amateurs. He was looking for the small cracks, the lazy patch job by an underpaid IT tech, the forgotten vulnerability. He found it in less than 10 minutes, an outdated plugin on their WordPress-based public website. It was a child's lock on a bank vault. With a few lines of code, he was in. Not deep inside, but he had a foothold. He was a whisper in their digital corridors. From this beachhead, he could begin his assault. He could see their network architecture, their server names, their security protocols. It was all laid out before him like a map. He looked at the clock. It was 3:14 a.m. They had taken his daughter at 5:15 p.m., less than 10 hours ago, and they were all sleeping now, confident in their lies, secure behind their wall. "The body cameras will clarify everything," Detective Morrison had said. David's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Yes," he whispered to the humming servers. "They will." He began to write a custom script, a piece of code designed to do one thing: hunt for the digital storage location of all body camera footage from the Oak Creek PD, copy it, and deliver it to him, all without tripping a single alarm. The ghost was now inside their house, and he was about to steal their most precious secret. The Oak Creek Police Precinct operated on a system called OmniCore, a third-party data management suite that handled everything from case files and evidence logs to dispatch records and internal emails. It was a closed, proprietary system, heavily encrypted and supposedly secure. To the officers and staff who used it, It was an impenetrable digital fortress. To David Washington, it was just another puzzle box. From his initial foothold in their public website, he had spent the pre-dawn hours mapping their internal network. He found the Omnicore server firewalled off from the rest of the network, as expected. But he also found the terminal used by the Precinct's lone overworked IT technician, a man named George Stern. David scanned George's desktop remotely, sifting through cached files and temporary data. He found what he was looking for, a forgotten text file containing a list of backup passwords, including a low-level administrator password for the Omnicore maintenance portal. It was a sloppy mistake, but the kind of shortcut a burned-out employee would take. It was all the invitation David needed. At 6:05 a.m., as the morning shift began to trickle into the precinct, David executed the first phase of his plan. He wasn't going for a noisy brute force attack. He was a phantom. He used the maintenance password to slip into Omnicore's backend. Once inside, he didn't just have access, he had control. He could see everything, every file, every email, every record. He found the body camera archives. The files were uploaded wirelessly from the officer's vests at the end of each shift and stored on a secure, redundant RAID array. He located the files from Miller and Riley's cameras, time-stamped just after 5 p.m. the previous day. 2 files, each about a gigabyte. He initiated a slow, throttled download to his own secure server, a data transfer so quiet it would be indistinguishable from routine network traffic. While the files copied, he went to work. He wasn't content to just steal the evidence. He wanted to sow chaos. He wanted them to feel the same helplessness and confusion that his daughter felt in her final moments. At 7:30 a.m., Sergeant Henderson at the front desk tried to log into the dispatch system to check the day's duty roster. The screen flashed, "Access denied, incorrect password." He tried again, same result. He called out to another officer who tried on her terminal. She was locked out too. Within 10 minutes, every single terminal in the precinct that used Omnicore was displaying the same message. No one could access case files, pull up warrants, or even check their email. The entire digital nervous system of the precinct was paralyzed. Panic began to set in. Chief Davies was called at home. He arrived, red-faced and furious, to find his precinct in utter disarray. "Get George Stern in here now," he bellowed. When the flustered IT tech arrived, he couldn't even log into his own administrative console. He was locked out of his own system. It was like a janitor finding that someone had changed the locks on every door in the building and then stolen his master keys. While Stern fumbled helplessly, David moved to phase 2. He wasn't just locking them out. He was manipulating their reality. He accessed the precinct's automated email system. He crafted an email, spoofing Chief Davies' address, and sent it to every officer on the force. It announced an immediate, mandatory sensitivity and de-escalation training seminar to be held that afternoon. Failure to attend would result in immediate suspension. The email included a link to register, which led to a dummy page David had created. Then he sent another email, this time appearing to come from the police union representative. It informed all officers that due to a significant data breach, all departmental passwords had been compromised. It instructed them to log into a secure portal, another one of David's creations, and enter their old password along with their badge number and social security number to be issued a new one. The officers, already confused and frustrated by the system lockout, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Within an hour, David had a database containing the personal information and login credentials of nearly every officer in the Oak Creek PD. But his cruelest trick was reserved for the 911 dispatch center. He couldn't ethically shut it down completely. Innocent lives were at stake, but he could cripple it. He didn't reroute calls. Instead, he subtly corrupted their mapping software. When a call came in, the address would display on the dispatcher's screen, but the location pin on the digital map would be off, sometimes by a few blocks, sometimes by a mile. It was a tiny, insidious change that would turn every emergency response into a confusing, delayed nightmare. A fire truck sent to Elm Street instead of Elm Avenue. An ambulance searching for a house on the north side of town when the emergency was on the south. The precinct was now not only blind, but also deaf and dumb. They were stumbling in the dark, and David Washington was the one who had cut the power. Back in his office, the download of the body cam footage completed. Two files set on his desktop. Miller became 082 MP4 and Riley Shanky became 82025 MP4. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The truth. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the mouse. He was terrified of what he was about to see, of reliving the worst moment of his life. But he had to know. He had to see it through Naomi's eyes. He clicked on Riley's file first. The footage was shaky, chaotic. It began with the view from the passenger seat of the cruiser. He heard Miller's voice, coarse and annoyed. Another call from the old hag on Hemlock. Swears she saw a hoodie scoping her birdbath. 10-1, it's just some kid cutting through. They pulled up. The camera lurched as Riley got out of the car. He saw Naomi, his Naomi, walking serenely in the golden light. She looked so small, so alive. He heard Miller's commands, loud and aggressive. He saw Naomi stop, her posture immediately compliant. He saw her confusion, and then he saw her hands. On the screen, clear as day, were her signs. I am deaf. I can't hear you. They weren't aggressive. They were clear, precise, the signs he had practiced with her 1,000 times. A desperate plea for understanding. He heard Riley's nervous voice. Frank, what's she doing? Is that some kind of gang sign? He saw the terror in his daughter's eyes as Miller drew his weapon. He saw her hands fly up again, faster this time, but still clear. Please, don't shoot. I am deaf. He saw the portfolio slip. He saw Miller flinch at the sound of the latch hitting the pavement. And then, through Riley's camera, he saw the flash from Miller's gun. He saw his daughter's body jerk, then fall. He saw it all. Tears streamed down David's face, hot and silent. The video was irrefutable. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a justified shooting. It was murder, born of ignorance and impatience. He closed the file, his breathing ragged. He knew Miller's footage would show the same, but from the shooter's perspective. He couldn't bring himself to watch it. Not yet. Just then, his encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from Jessica Ramsey. Mr. Washington, I am so sorry for your loss. I've seen the preliminary report. It's a work of fiction. I'll take the case. We need to meet immediately. I need everything you have. David wiped his eyes. His grief was a bottomless ocean, but his resolve was a granite cliff. He typed his reply. I have the body cam footage, the raw, unedited files. I'm sending them to you now. They don't know I have it. They don't know who I am. He attached the 2 video files and sent them over a secure, encrypted channel. Then he turned his attention back to the OCPD network. Stealing the footage was just the beginning. Locking them out was a parlor trick. Now it was time to dig. It was time to find every dirty secret, every buried complaint, every erased file in the history of the Oak Creek Police Department. He had their passwords. He had their data. He had their digital souls. He was no longer just a grieving father. He was an archaeologist of corruption, and he was about to unearth every single bone. The ghost was no longer just haunting their machine. He was possessing it. Jessica Ramsey was in her downtown office, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, when the files from David arrived. She was a woman who ran on caffeine and a righteous fury against injustice. Her reputation as a legal bulldog was well-earned. She'd once made a police chief cry on the witness stand. When she'd gotten David's initial email, her heart sank. Another one. Another family shattered. Another official story that smelled like a lie. But then the video files came through. It was unprecedented. Usually it took months of legal battles, court orders, and motions just to get her hands on redacted, heavily edited body cam footage. To have the raw files within 24 hours of the incident was unheard of. It told her 2 things. The police were hiding something truly awful, and her new client, David Washington, was no ordinary man. She played Riley's file first, her face impassive, her legal mind dissecting every frame. She watched Naomi's walk, the approach of the officers, the fatal misunderstanding. She saw what David saw, a scared child trying to communicate, met with lethal force. There was no threat. There was no weapon. There was no justification. A wave of cold anger washed over her. This was not just negligence. This was a criminal act. She then steeled herself and played Miller's file. The perspective was chillingly different. The world was viewed through the eyes of the killer. The camera was steady, his breathing even. He was in complete control. When Naomi started signing, Miller's voice could be heard, a low mutter to himself, captured by the microphone on his vest. "What is this crap? Little punk thinks she's a tough guy." The audio was damning. It wasn't the voice of a scared officer perceiving a threat. It was the voice of a man filled with contempt. He saw defiance where there was only fear. He saw aggression where there was only a desperate attempt to be understood. When he fired, there was no hesitation. The camera barely even shook. After the shots, as he walked towards Naomi's fallen body, he spoke again, this time to the frantic Riley. "You calm down, kid. It was a clean shoot. She reached, I fired. End of story. You saw it." It wasn't a question. It was a command. He was cementing the lie, forcing his reality onto the terrified rookie. Jessica saved the files to a secure, air-gapped hard drive. This was the case. This was the whole damn case. It was a slam dunk, a prosecutor's dream. But she knew it wasn't that simple. The district attorney was a close ally of the police union. IA would bury this. The city would fight tooth and nail to keep this footage from ever seeing the light of day. They would claim it was doctored, that it was stolen, that it was inadmissible. She called David. "I've seen it," she said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "It's worse than I could have imagined. David, this is irrefutable proof of murder, but they will do everything in their power to make sure a jury never sees it." "I know." David's voice came through the encrypted line, calm and cold as ice. "So we don't play by their rules. We don't give them the chance to bury it. We release it. To the press? David, if you release it now, they'll charge you with hacking, with theft of evidence. It could jeopardize the entire criminal case against Miller. It gives them an excuse to attack the source, not the substance." "I'm not talking about giving it to the 6 o'clock news," David clarified. "Not yet. We need to be smarter. We need to detonate it in a way they can't control. We need to create a firestorm that they can't possibly put out." He explained his plan. It was audacious, multi-layered, and brilliant. He wouldn't just drop the video on YouTube. He would seed it everywhere simultaneously through a network of activist groups, independent journalists, and international news outlets that the city's lawyers couldn't intimidate. He would embed it with a package of other documents he was currently acquiring. While the precinct was in chaos, dealing with locked systems and misdirected fire trucks, David had been busy. Using the credentials he'd harvested, he had burrowed deep into the city's servers. He found the internal affairs database. It was a treasure trove of corruption. He found a dozen prior excessive force complaints against Officer Frank Miller, all of them dismissed with a cursory investigation. He found evidence of Miller using racial slurs on the department's internal messaging system. He found performance reviews where supervisors noted Miller's aggressive attitude and unwillingness to de-escalate, only to be ignored. He also dug into Chief Robert Davies. He found emails detailing Davies's efforts to suppress a DUI charge for a city councilman's son. He found budget records showing Davies had used department funds to pay for a lavish vacation, disguised as a security conference. He found a pattern, a deep rot of cronyism and corruption that started at the very top. "They didn't just kill my daughter, Jessica," David said, his voice laced with a venomous calm. "They fostered the environment that made it possible. I'm not just going to take down the man who pulled the trigger. I'm going to burn the whole rotten forest down." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing the sheer scale of what David was doing. He was single-handedly waging a digital war against an entire branch of city government. He was committing a dozen felonies, and yet she couldn't find it in her to object. The system was broken. The legal channels were clogged and corrupted. David was creating his own justice. "Okay, David," she said finally, "I will handle the legal front. I'm filing a wrongful death suit this afternoon. I'm going to petition the court for the body cam footage, which they will deny. We'll play their game in public, while you play yours in the shadows. But you need to be careful. They are going to hunt for you. When this breaks, finding the hacker will be their #1 priority." "Let them hunt," David replied. "A ghost is hard to catch." That evening, the first official press conference was held. Chief Davies stood at a podium, flanked by the city's mayor. He looked grave and somber, a performance of a lifetime. He offered his deepest condolences to the Washington family. He spoke of the difficult and dangerous job his officers faced every day. While the investigation is ongoing, Davies said, his voice firm, preliminary evidence indicates the officers acted according to their training when faced with a non-compliant individual who made threatening gestures and appeared to be armed. A reporter shouted a question. "Chief, there are rumors the girl was deaf. Can you confirm that?" Davies' eyes flickered for a second. "We are aware of those reports. However, the suspect's non-compliance and aggressive actions gave the officers no choice but to respond to the perceived deadly threat. The tragic outcome is something we all regret." The story was set. Naomi Washington was no longer a child, an artist, a daughter. She was the suspect. Her deafness was an inconvenient detail, her murder a tragic outcome. David watched the press conference from his command center, his face illuminated by the glow of his monitors. He saw the lies flowing from the chief's mouth, and he felt nothing but a cold, driving rage. He put the finishing touches on his digital bomb. He had a 10-minute video. It started with a photo of Naomi, smiling, holding one of her paintings. Then it cut to the raw, unedited footage from both Miller's and Riley's cameras, played side by side. He subtitled Naomi's frantic signs, "I am deaf. Please don't shoot." He ended the video with a montage of screenshots. Miller's past complaints, his racist messages, Davies's corrupt emails. Over the final frames, black text appeared on a white screen. "This is what they don't want you to see. This is the unedited truth of the murder of Naomi Washington. Her name was Naomi." He uploaded the package to 100 different servers across the globe. He wrote a script that would release it to a curated list of contacts at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning. The city had drawn its battle lines. They had their story, their press conference, their wall of silence. David Washington had the truth, and it was about to go viral. At 8 a.m. sharp, David's digital bomb exploded across the internet. The video, titled "The Unedited Truth of Naomi Washington's Murder," simultaneously appeared on global news sites, activist forums, and social media feeds. Its spread was instantaneous and unstoppable. By 9 a.m., it was "Justice for Naomi" was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The public reaction was a tidal wave of grief and fury. People saw the unedited footage of a scared child trying to communicate her deafness, only to be met with lethal force. They heard Officer Miller's cold, contemptuous voice, and then saw the documented evidence of his bigotry and the department's corruption. It was a complete and devastating narrative that left no room for doubt. By lunchtime, the streets outside the Oak Creek Police Precinct were flooded with thousands of protesters. They carried signs with Naomi's smiling face, their chants for justice echoing off the brick walls of the besieged building. The city was in an uproar. Inside, Chief Robert Davies was in a state of apoplectic panic. His office was inundated with furious calls from the mayor and the state attorney general. He watched the video, horrified not by the murder, but by the fact that the world was watching it with him. "Find the leak," he bellowed, but his department was technologically blind. David's earlier sabotage had left their systems crippled, turning their frantic search for the source into a futile exercise in chasing digital ghosts. They were trapped in a crisis they could not control. From his hidden command center, David Washington monitored their chaos. With the world now watching the precinct's every move, he escalated his assault. This was no longer just about Naomi. It was about eradicating the institutional rot that allowed her death to happen. He moved from information warfare to systematic destruction. Using the credentials he had harvested, he anonymously fed incriminating evidence to federal agencies. Chief Davies's financial records, detailing a kickback scheme, were sent to the IRS. Officer Miller's history of violence and his ties to a local loan shark were packaged and delivered to the FBI. He was triggering official investigations that would gut the department from within, using their own corruption as the weapon. The pressure inside the precinct became unbearable. The weakest link in their wall of silence was Officer Kevin Riley. Consumed by guilt and terror, Riley hadn't slept in days. He saw Naomi's face every time he closed his eyes. He saw his own face on the viral video, the silent accomplice to a killing. A threatening phone call from Miller, ordering him to keep your mouth shut, only amplified his fear. He was trapped between a murderer's command and the entire world's condemnation. The final straw came that evening. As Riley sat in an office for yet another debriefing, the massive protest outside roared. Suddenly, a brick smashed through a front window, the sound of shattering glass echoing like a gunshot. That sound broke him. It was the sound of a world that would never be quiet again, a world that knew his secret. Shaking uncontrollably, he stumbled into a bathroom, his reflection showing the face of a haunted man. He couldn't live with the lie any longer. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He knew the union lawyer would only protect Miller. He needed to tell the truth to someone who would actually listen. He found the number for Jessica Ramsey. Taking a shuddering breath, he made the call that would bring the entire corrupt structure crashing down. "My name is Kevin Riley," he stammered when her assistant answered. "I was there when they shot Naomi Washington. I need to tell her what really happened." The secret meeting took place in a secluded diner booth miles from the city. Kevin Riley looked like a man being crushed by the weight of his own conscience. His hands trembled as he recounted the shooting to Jessica Ramsey, his voice cracking with guilt. He confirmed everything the video showed, but then gave Jessica the conspiracy that the footage couldn't capture. "He made me lie," Riley confessed, his eyes downcast. "Frank stood over my shoulder and dictated my official report, word for word, so it would match his. He said, 'First rule of the job, kid, a dead perp can't testify.' He wasn't scared or regretful, he was proud." The confession which Jessica recorded was the key. It was direct evidence of a conspiracy to obstruct justice, delivered by a cooperating police officer. Riley's testimony didn't just condemn Miller, it exposed the institutional rot that enabled him. He agreed to testify before a grand jury, desperate to unburden his soul. Jessica knew the local authorities would try to bury this. She immediately contacted the one person she knew would act, Ben Carter, the head of the U.S. Attorney's Civil Rights Division. She sent him an encrypted digital package containing everything: the unedited body cam footage, Riley's recorded confession, and a summary of the widespread financial corruption David had uncovered. It was an overwhelming body of evidence, painting a picture of a police department so corrupt that it could no longer be trusted to police itself. The federal response was immediate and decisive. The combination of a viral video showing a clear civil rights violation and an officer confessing to a cover-up forced their hand. 2 days later, at dawn, the FBI descended on Oak Creek. The operation was swift and overwhelming. A fleet of federal vehicles swarmed the police precinct, seizing servers and files as local officers were ordered to stand down. They were no longer investigators. They were the subjects of a federal probe. At the same time, another team arrested Frank Miller at his home. He was charged not with manslaughter, but with violating Naomi Washington's civil rights resulting in her death, a federal crime that carried a life sentence. A third team served a warrant on Chief Robert Davies, informing him he was the subject of a federal corruption investigation. The city suspended him before the agents had even left his office. From his command center, David Washington watched the news reports. He saw Miller in handcuffs and Davies hiding his face from cameras. The system he had targeted was collapsing under the weight of its own depravity. Justice was beginning to turn its wheels, but the victory felt profoundly empty. It would not bring his daughter back. His war, however, required one final act. He navigated back into the OCPD's evidence server, a digital ghost in a machine now crawling with federal agents. He found the falsified report on Naomi's death. He didn't delete it. Instead, he replaced the text document with a single high-resolution photograph of Naomi, smiling brightly on her 16th birthday. Beneath it, he added one line of text. Her name was Naomi Washington. Remember it. Then he began to disappear. Methodically, he scrubbed the logs, closed his back doors, and erased every trace of his digital war. By the time FBI forensic experts analyzed the system, they would find evidence of a masterful intrusion, but no clue as to who was responsible. The ghost in the machine was gone. Only a grieving father remained. The trial of Frank Miller was a national spectacle. Held in a federal courthouse to avoid local bias, it was broadcast on every major network. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney Ben Carter, built an airtight case. They had the video, the irrefutable, unedited truth of Naomi's last moments. And they had the star witness, former officer Kevin Riley. Riley, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, took the stand. He was pale and gaunt, but his voice was steady. He walked the jury through the shooting, frame by damning frame. He recounted Miller's racist remarks, his pride in the shooting, and his systematic orchestration of the cover-up. Miller's defense attorney tried to paint Riley as a liar, a scared rookie trying to save his own skin, but the jury saw the raw, unvarnished guilt in the young man's eyes. They believed him. The defense's case was pathetic. They argued that Miller's 25 years of service should count for something, that he had made a split-second decision in a high-stress situation. They tried to cast doubt on Naomi, bringing up a time she was reprimanded in middle school for drawing on her desk. It was a desperate, offensive tactic that only served to anger the jury. David Washington attended every single day of the trial. He sat in the front row, silent and stoic. He never once looked at Miller. His gaze was fixed on the prosecutors, on the judge, on the jury. He was a silent sentinel, a physical embodiment of the reason everyone was there. His presence was a heavy, unyielding weight in the courtroom. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was read to a hushed courtroom. On the charge of violating civil rights resulting in death, we, the jury, find the defendant, Frank Miller, guilty. A gasp went through the gallery. Jessica Ramsey, sitting beside David, placed a hand on his arm. David didn't react. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, taking a slow, deep breath. But the true karma, the hard karma the universe demands, came not from the judge's sentence, but from the complete and utter unraveling of the life Miller had built on a foundation of hate and lies. During the sentencing phase, Miller's wife of 30 years filed for divorce, stating in her declaration that she could no longer live with a man who had so little regard for human life. His 2 adult sons wrote a letter to the court, read aloud by the prosecutor, disowning their father and expressing their profound shame and sorrow for the Washington family. His own blood had turned against him. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, a broken, defeated old man, he finally looked at David. For the first time, there was no indifference in his eyes. There was only the dawning horror of a man who had lost everything and was finally forced to confront the abyss of what he had done. The fallout for the Oak Creek Police Department was catastrophic. The FBI's corruption investigation, fueled by the evidence David had anonymously supplied, led to a dozen more arrests, including that of former Chief Davies, who was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for racketeering and obstruction of justice. The department was deemed so systemically corrupt that it was disbanded by a federal consent decree. A new police force was built from the ground up, with strict civilian oversight and mandatory training on dealing with the deaf and hard-of-hearing community. The name Oak Creek PD became a national symbol of disgrace. David Washington, however, did not fade into the background. His civil suit against the city settled for a record-breaking sum, but he didn't keep a dime of the money. He used it all to establish the Naomi Washington Foundation for a brighter canvas. The foundation's mission was twofold. It provided scholarships for gifted young artists from underprivileged communities, and it worked with police departments across the country to implement mandatory immersive training programs designed to bridge the communication gap with disabled individuals. He became a public advocate, a quiet, dignified man whose soft voice carried the weight of immense loss and unshakable conviction. He never spoke of his digital war, of the ghost who had brought a city to its knees. He let the world believe that the truth had come out through a mysterious whistleblower. His revenge was complete, but he found that it wasn't revenge he had truly been seeking. It was a legacy. He found a way to live with the grief. He moved out of the house on Hemlock Drive, but he had the old oak tree, the one he had planted for Naomi, carefully uprooted and moved to the center of a new public park named in her honor. Sometimes he would go there and sit on a bench, watching children play under its branches. He had torn down a corrupt system and held the guilty accountable. He had ensured his daughter's name would be remembered not as a suspect, but as a catalyst for change. He had lost his entire world, but in its place he had built a monument. And in that, he finally found a sliver of peace. The ghost was gone, but the father, in the memory of his beautiful, silent artist, would endure forever. The story of Naomi and David Washington is a harrowing reminder of how quickly injustice can shatter a family. But it is also a powerful testament to the unyielding force of a father's love. It shows us that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to expose it to the light, no matter the cost. Naomi's voice was silenced, but her father made sure her story would echo for eternity, sparking a movement and forcing real, tangible change. Her legacy proves that one person, driven by love and armed with the truth, can indeed topple giants. If this story moved you, if you believe that we must continue to fight for justice and demand accountability from those in power, please help share Naomi's story. Like this video to help it reach more people, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. By keeping these narratives alive, we honor the victims and continue the fight for a better, more just world. Thank you for listening.